If you've ever spent time in Turkey, or honestly just chatted with Turkish people about the world, you are going to run into this really fascinating phenomenon, a deep-rooted, almost romantic affection for Japan. It's this profound admiration that just completely crosses generations. But where does this love story actually begin? Well, today in this explainer, we're unpacking this incredible cultural bond and uncovering what it really says about us. Let's jump right in.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've all heard the phrases, right? Japanese people are so honest, or they never ruin their traditions, or, my personal favorite, I wish we could be like the Japanese. But here is the wild, ironic twist our sources point out. A massive portion of the people repeating these exact phrases have literally never set foot in Japan. They don't speak Japanese, and they haven't really formed deep relationships with Japanese people. Yet that sympathy is just incredibly strong. So why is that? Well, this affection isn't just pulled out of thin air. It's anchored in some incredibly dramatic, real-life historical bonds. I mean, it starts with actual heroic rescues. Back in 1890, the Ottoman Ertuğrul Frigate tragically sank off the Japanese coast, and locals in Kushimoto heroically rescued the survivors. Then, fast forward to 1904, Japan's stunning victory in the Russo-Japanese War sent shockwaves of inspiration through the Ottoman Empire. This was a huge deal. It was the first time an Asian nation defeated a major European power, which happened to be one of the Ottomans' biggest rivals. Then, in 1921, a Japanese ship, the Heimi Maru, saved Ottoman soldiers, and the captain flat-out refused to hand them over to opposing forces. No way, not happening. Decades later, in 1985, Turkish Airlines boldly returned the favor, flying straight into a war zone to evacuate hundreds of stranded Japanese citizens from Tehran. These are powerful, undeniable stories of mutual respect.
But it wasn't just ships and soldiers. There were these early cultural ambassadors who built the very first personal bridges between the two nations. Imagine this. A Japanese merchant named Yamada Torajiro heads to Istanbul purely for trade, but he ends up staying. He lives under the Ottoman Sultan's own patronage and eventually writes books introducing Ottoman culture to Japan. And on the flip side, we have Abdurrashid Ibrahim, a Tatar intellectual, who traveled to Tokyo in the early 1900s, spreading knowledge of Islam and laying the actual groundwork for what would eventually become the Tokyo Mosque. These guys planted some very, very powerful seeds of cultural admiration.
But let's be real for a second. Our modern affection is heavily, heavily visual. Older generations grew up absolutely captivated by the epic Samurai of the Shogun miniseries, those beautiful Silk Road documentaries, and Barish Mancho's beloved television programs. Meanwhile, younger generations, completely immersed in the worlds of anime, Pokémon, and the breathtaking art of Studio Ghibli. Despite the generational gap, we've all been fed this perfectly curated, flawless aesthetic. Japan is pretty much always presented to us as fascinating, beautiful, and utterly orderly. Which brings us to a really fascinating turning point in this explainer. We kind of have to stop and ask ourselves, is the Japan in our minds actually the real Japan? It's a crucial question, because while our historical ties are absolutely real, our modern perception has morphed into something of a utopia. Are we truly loving the reality of Japan, or are we simply using the idea of Japan as a sort of psychological mirror? And this brilliantly illustrates the whole psychological revelation here. Think about it. When we say Japanese people obey the rules, or they are so hardworking, we state it as this ultimate fact of admiration. But what we're actually saying, what we actually mean deep down is, I wish our society followed rules, and I wish we were more productive. Japan has essentially become a utopian mirror for our own unfulfilled desires. They represent a society that successfully balanced modernization with its core identity, which is an ideal that a lot of nations have long strived for. We are basically projecting our own hopes onto an idealized version of them.
So what actually happens when we pull back the curtain on this so-called perfect society? Look, high trust definitely exists there. It is genuinely amazing to see cashierless stores on university campuses where people just scan, pay, and leave, or to hear those stories of lost wallets always being returned. But crime isn't zero. Actually, fraud and organized crime still occur. Major corporate and political scandals happen there just like they do anywhere else in the world. When we elevate a country to a flawless utopia, we kind of strip away its complex, messy human reality.
There's also a much darker side to that hard-working stereotype we praise so much. It's summed up in one really tragic concept, karoshi. It translates literally to death by overwork. It is a profound social cost. Yes, Japanese people work incredibly long hours, but working long hours doesn't magically equal high productivity. In fact, Japan today struggles with low productivity, severe labor shortages due to a rapidly aging workforce, and the heartbreaking human toll of this relentless work culture. It's a very sobering reality check for sure.
And what about that whole myth that they've perfectly preserved their ancient ways?
Sure, if you go to Kyoto, you will absolutely find ancient temples, serene tea ceremonies, and people wearing stunning kimonos. But take a bullet train to Tokyo, and boom, you're suddenly in the middle of a massive Halloween street party, sipping a Starbucks, surrounded by elaborate Christmas decorations. The reality isn't that they froze their culture in a museum display case. They are absolute masters of adapting the global into the local. They didn't reject the outside world, they just integrated it on their own terms.
Then there's this persistent urban legend going around that Japanese and Turkish traditional family structures are basically identical. Now, maybe decades ago there were similarities in cinematic portrayals, but the modern reality is a stark demographic crisis. The age of marriage is rising rapidly, while birth rates have plunged to historic, critical lows. We're seeing a massive surge in single-person households and a rapidly growing elderly population. The family dynamic there is facing an unprecedented shift toward isolation. Not those big, bustling traditional families we might like to imagine.
So, the crucial point is how this fundamentally alters social dynamics, which honestly are quite different from what we might expect. Take the Japanese concept of being polite. It involves these invisible boundaries, keeping a respectful distance and fiercely protecting personal space. It's peaceful, yeah, but it can feel quite distant. Contrast that with the Turkish norm of being sincere, or samimi olmak, which is literally all about erasing those boundaries ASAP, overwhelming warmth, and making extremely fast friendships. One is about maintaining respectful distance, the other is about jumping right into each other's lives. Both have deep value, but they are absolutely not the same thing.
This brings us to the absolute core of our explainer today. For years, we've fallen into this trap of attributing Japan's economic and societal success merely to their discipline or their innate honesty. We treat it like it's some sort of magical genetic trait. But guess what? The ultimate secret to their success isn't some innate character trait. It's institutions. The real pillars of their prosperity, well, they're actually built on some pretty unglamorous, painstaking, roll-up-your-sleeves kind of work over decades. It's about well-functioning local municipalities. It's high-quality public services that people can actually rely on every single day. It's the result of long-term education policies that outlast short-term political cycles, a deep-rooted corporate culture, and really well-established vocational training systems. These are incredibly complex, resilient systems built over generations. The magic isn't in some mythical persona. It's in the hard, everyday work of building and maintaining strong institutions. There's this one quote from our source material that literally stopped me in my tracks during this research. Perhaps we love a dream, not Japan. We are looking for a symbol of a society that has balanced modernization with identity. I think that beautifully summarizes our whole takeaway today. Acknowledging the real Japan, a country grappling with economic stagnation, loneliness, and the heavy weight of its complex institutions, is actually way more meaningful. Real love for a culture means accepting its complex, sometimes messy realities alongside its triumphs, not just worshiping an imaginary ideal. Which leads me to a final thought for you to chew on today. When you look at Japan now, do you see a flawless utopia? Or do you see a complex mirror reflecting our own societal hopes? Next time you find yourself deeply admiring a foreign culture, take a moment to ask yourself, what does this admiration really say about what you want for your own society? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the world around you.